On the 15th of April, 1989, 96 fans of Liverpool Football Club died at Hillsborough. To this day, no one has ever been held accountable for this disaster. Every year on this date, they have been remembered on Merseyside and the world over. For this episode, in place of our usual piece, A Kick in the Grass, we have a tribute to those 96 souls whose lives were needlessly lost. Stephen F. Kelly has written many books on football, the majority of them about Liverpool FC, and he has kindly given his permission to use his piece titled Hillsborough from the book which he himself edited, A Game of Two Halves. It is narrated by club member Carl Rees from Bebington, and we here at MP Red thank Carl and thank Stephen for his permission to use his work. The 96 will never be forgotten. This is our tribute.
Hillsborough. High up in the Kemlyn Road sits a woman. It is a Monday afternoon. She is the only occupant of the massive steel and cantilever structure that stretches the length of Anfield, home of Liverpool Football Club. She has not come to watch a football match. She sits, staring pitifully into space. Around her, the upturned plastic seats glisten in the spring's brightness. On the seat next to her lies a bouquet of fresh flowers. It was my son's first birthday party, Saturday 15th of April 1989, an event which demanded my presence. There was never any question of my going to Hillsborough. I stayed home to supervise the jelly, cream cakes and games, as well as the drinks for us older boys. It was just as well. I almost certainly would have been on those terraces at the Leppings Lane end of the ground. On the big occasions, I always preferred to be among the scallies. At Heysel I had stood on that ill-fated terrace, at one point within yards of the flimsy fence that would eventually topple the Belgian government and bring shame to Britain. We listened on the radio. Beardsley struck the crossbar, and then confusion. More trouble on the terraces, we thought despondently. I turned the radio off to serve the jelly. Nick looked bemused. His older cousin helped him blow out the candles. And we all sang happy birthday. It was the last time we were to smile for days. The radio went back on, still confusion. Nobody certain what was happening. But now it looked as if there'd been an accident rather than crowd trouble. We returned to the party. 20 minutes later I stole into the kitchen again. This time it was sounding ominous. Ambulance men racing across the pitch, chaos everywhere. Makeshift stretchers being prepared out of hoardings, and behind the goal, just a hint of disaster. The news quickly spread around the party, yet none of us had any inkling what was to come. Then, the first chilling suggestion of tragedy. There are reports of some deaths, announced the commentator stonily. The afternoon wore on, and the figures mounted painfully. At least 6 people are feared dead. The death toll has now risen to more than a dozen. We have reports of 22 dead. Around me children jostled and shrieked, but you can't stop children enjoying themselves. 4:40 p.m. The game should have been finishing. 35 people are now known to have died. People began to leave. Nick, worn out, clung to his blanket. I switched on the television. All afternoon it had been relaying live pictures of the horror. Thankfully I had seen none. Suddenly, it was 50 dead. Then almost as quickly, 60. I began to make some phone calls. Did he go to the game? Was he standing? Have you heard from him? In between answering calls we watched. Images now trapped in our minds. Faces screwed against wire fences. Policemen unheeding to the calls of distress. And those makeshift stretchers. Poor Nick had a rotten birthday party. A day to forget. But we never shall. Death inevitably brings with it many forms of ritual, from the perfumed, smouldering pyres of Varanasi to the traditional Mexican villages, where villagers pay their respects by laying food, candles and water at the door of the dead. In Liverpool, they adopted a ritual of their own. On that Saturday night, the Scallies sneaked up to Anfield and furtively tied their red scarves to the Shankly gates. It was their ritual, and the dead would have been impressed by it. It was reported on the local radio stations, and as Sunday wore on, more scarves, hats and flowers were added. By Monday, the Shankly gates had been turned into a shrine, as pile upon pile of flowers, wreaths, scarves and hats hung proudly and sadly from the railings. Then someone asked if they could lay flowers on the cop. "Of course," said the club, and the gates were obligingly thrown open. By the end of the week, 500,000 had filed past the cop, laid their flowers, wrapped their scarves to the railings, paid their respects. They came from far afield to join in the pilgrimage. The mightiest in the land, crown princes, politicians, local dignitaries, footballers, supporters, ordinary folk, some who had never even seen a football match, let alone Liverpool. We went with Nick, his first visit to Anfield. It ought to have been the roar of the crowd. Instead it was in sombre silence. I threw my scarf on a cop. Gradually the wreaths spread, extending from the back of the goal to cover the goal mouth, then to hide the penalty area. By the time they closed the gates a week later, half the pitch was shrouded in flowers. They said that in that early morning, the fragrance and the gentle rustle of cellophane in the Mersey breeze was enough to make any grown man weep. In Liverpool that Saturday night, life came to a standstill. The pubs, normally a hubbub of clinking glasses and chattering foursomes, lay deserted. The cinemas empty, the club silent. The music switched off. By midnight the death toll was in the 90s. And the next day, as the news began to sink in, Liverpool turned into a ghost town. Its inhabitants remained indoors, sifting tearfully through the Sunday newspapers, listening to the local radio stations, hoping it was all a nightmare. It was how Manchester must have felt after Munich. In the evening there was a hurriedly prepared mass at the Catholic Cathedral. A white-faced Kenny Dalglish clung to his wife. Bruce Grobbelaar, so often the clown of Anfield, his voice now shaking as he bravely read the lesson. John Aldridge shamelessly brushing aside his tears. The other players looking as if they had not slept that night. And outside, the thousands, listening, praying, sharing their grief. Footballers and fans so often accused of frivolity, now dignified as they mourned. A single choir boy sang, "You'll Never Walk Alone," and you could hear the nation's tears. Almost everyone in Liverpool knew of someone who had died. I knew of just one. A young boy, 15, who had gone to the game with his elder brother. As they rushed through the open gates, they lost each other. Ian's last memory of his brother was seeing him being swept away in the crowd and down that dark, profound tunnel. Ian survived, somehow struggling out of the crush to go in search of his brother. Imagine the guilt he was to feel. What do you say when you meet your parents? The younger brother in his care, and he had lost him. He came to my house 3 days later and sat with glazed eyes, still weeping, a shivering, curled-up, frightened teenager. A typical Liverpool scally, cursing and bitter. How could the police be so stupid? He asked again and again. There was no answer. It was impossible to respond. He asked if he could have a copy of my History of Liverpool Football Club. But not yet, he said. Soon. He never did get his copy. He was a diabetic. 6 months later, they found him in his bed. He was dead. They said he had suffered renal failure. No way. He had died of grief.